Planetome, my name is Tim Tobin. I'm the CEO of Planetome. Planetome it's a little bit different journey than probably most of the companies you have heard from. Planetome started out as part of a semiconductor technology company. So semiconductor making chips, you make chips on wafers. And it was part of a company that I was co-founder and CEO of. We started in '98. We exited in 2023. To a public company, but what we were doing is we were developing one of the processes that you use to make a chip. And it's a process where we polish the surface of the wafer where chips are made such that it's almost perfectly atomically smooth. And we were doing it for big name companies like Intel and Samsung and Facebook and companies like that. So our CFO one day said to us, here we are, this small $25, $30 million company. Where else can we use this technology? And we said, that's a great question. So we started looking for it. So again, that's where Planetome came from, out of the semiconductor industry. So what is Planetome? I'm going to define what it is and a couple things that it's not. We are not a product company. So we're an IP company. We took technology from one industry, we moved it to another one. We have a patented technology platform that we adapted from semiconductor manufacturing, and then we license it to industry leaders so they can create the most advanced surgical instruments in the world, surgical cutting instruments in the world. So most people don't know much about semiconductor manufacturing. So just to put it in perspective real quick, it's the most advanced, complicated process in the world, making chips. To date now, if you look at a chip the size of your fingernail, we're putting 50 billion transistors in that tiny little space, which is remarkable when you think about it. So the scale that we're doing that on is very complex. So to give you an idea, when we talk about polishing, the kind of scale, we are taking semiconductor level precision and putting it into the surgical instruments. So we're not putting chips in here. This is kind of what AI gave me when I said fused semiconductor and medical. But we take the same precision that we needed to make a chip, which is we polish the surface of the surgical instruments now such that it's the same as if you took a hair out of your head. You look at the little round end of that, you cut that up 15,000 times, and you take one piece. So that's the level of precision we're now putting into surgeons' hands to be able to do, or robots' hands to be able to do much more effective surgery. So current state of the art. You may be shocked, surgeons are even shocked, when we show them every medical grade stainless steel surgical device is manufactured by taking that stainless steel and grinding it with diamond grit wheels. So if you look at it under magnification, here is a side profile of what's doing the cutting. And see this little edge right here? With all the jagged serrations on it, that's actually the blade that's doing the cutting, which is remarkable when you look at that. It looks like a medieval torture device, right? So, and by the way, so this one's a scalpel blade, but every instrument cutting looks the same. If it's scissors, you just have two of those going against each other, endo cutters, all sorts of different things. So, so is there a problem with that? That's the question. So let me show you the problem. The problem is you get, with 100-year-old technology, and this, by the way, is the #1 blade in the entire world. We didn't look for the worst one. So everything else looks worse than that. So with 100-year-old technology, you get both clinical and economic constraints, which I'll get into in a minute, of that. And you can see it. It's really intuitive when you think about this. So if you have a blade that looks like a jagged, serrated saw, it tears and rips the tissues out and does much more trauma damage than it actually needs to do. So we buy the blade looking like this. We apply our polish to it. It looks like this. And of course, the resultant is a much lower trauma, much lower inflammation incision that you get. All of this ripping and snagging and tearing doesn't have to be healed anymore. So if you do less damage to begin with, you don't have many of the complications. Okay, so for the market for this, again, we are an IP, a manufacturing technology that we will put into our customers, our licensees' line. If you look at the roughly $15 billion surgical cutting instrument market, we've carved it down to really where our technology could apply. It's $8.4 billion market for our customers, and we've carved it up into 4 different pieces here. The robotic MIS, which I'm going to go into in more depth, because if you look at the economic value to that one is the most compelling case that we have, as well as traditional open, ortho, and reprocessing and repair. So we are now we just started in April speaking with many of these companies up here about licensing it. So we're just starting that process, and we have names that you would recognize, which you do up there, in every single one of those 4 that we were talking to about licensing, and particular interest within the robotics. So from a clinical standpoint, this is kind of the minimum bar to entry, but as we talked about before, it doesn't take a whole lot of, you don't have to be a medical professional to understand that one gives you a much better cut than the other one. So what does it do? We get much lower inflammation, 50 to 60% less collagen deposition. Here's this little red line right around here. That's the collagen deposition, and you can see that that's significantly lower from a Planetome blade. That's 7 days after incision. You also get much faster recovery. So this is after 3 days, side-by-side incisions, 90% wound closure with the Planetome blade, and only 10% wound closure from a traditional cutting blade. And again, this applies to whether it's scissors, rongeurs, curettes, you name it, and anything that's cutting. So that leads to much reduced post-operative complications. I'm going to cite just 2 of them here because usually I can take too much time and go through my whole 9 minutes in this one slide. But we have adverse scarring. If you're familiar with keloids or hypertrophic scarring, they're a big problem. The darker your skin tone is, the more prone you are to those. We have a 3-year, 114 patient study coming out. Matter of fact, it's about to be published in the PRS. 86% reduction by just changing the blade. So the other one is a diabetic wound healing. We had a study done with a diabetic patient set and a non-diabetic patient, healthy set, healthy with the conventional blade and ours with the Planetome. In all 3 healing phases, the Planetome blade was equivalent or better, and in most cases better, than a conventional blade on a healthy patient. So, and if you're familiar at all with diabetic foot ulcers, diabetes is obviously a big problem. 25% of the people that have a diabetic foot ulcer 25% of diabetics will get a diabetic foot ulcer. And then once you have one, it's the same 5-year mortality as all-cause cancer. So if you get much better healing by using our instruments, you'll get much better chance of survival there. The big thing, why do our OEM partners want to license this? The big thing is it brings differentiation. Everybody has been competing with that same jagged technology that we showed you before. So what's the big differentiation? Of course, there's the clinical that I spoke about, and there's an efficiency, but really what it brings is the durability. So all those serrations that rip and tear and snag the tissue out, that's also the failure mechanism of all of those devices. So they either gunk up with tissue, and then they are no longer sharp anymore, or they bend over and break off. So we get rid of those for the clinical benefits, and there's tremendous durability, 2 to 5 times longer. So then, customers in those buckets that we talked about, or licensees, they can decide to compete on margin or market share. They can truly differentiate from the people that are there other than them. So I mentioned the robotic surgery. Here's where it really is a very compelling story from an economic standpoint, as well as the clinical. For those of you who are familiar with the soft tissue robotic surgery business model, it's driven by instrumentation. It's kind of the razor blade model that we heard earlier. If you look at Intuitive, and I'm not picking on Intuitive, but their numbers are public, so we could get them, right? 61% of their revenue last year was from instrumentation and accessories. The robots were less than 20%. So the way they sell their instruments, like the monopolar curved scissors here, is that they're sold as a limited life reusable. In this particular case, so the monopolar curved scissors are guaranteed for 10 uses. They never make 10 uses. They usually make somewhere between 6 and 8, and then either hospitals throw them away if they're kind of lazy, or sometimes they send them in for credit. By putting on our technology, so it's a predominant, universally acknowledged by all, these are all soft tissue companies over here. There's not one we've spoken with yet that hasn't said this is either the major problem or one of my top 3 problems that I'm dealing with. So every single one, and we're a small company, we haven't gone and talked to all of them, but there's 6 or 7 of the companies and the big ones that you would anticipate that we've spoken with that are all acknowledged this is a big problem, right? And a predominant customer complaint. When we put our technology onto the monopolar curved scissors, they'll get that full 10 use. You can then repolish them again coming back, and you will get in our testing we get 12 to 14 more uses. So and that you don't have the cost of goods sold, the price can drop for the hospital. There's so many good things that come out of that from an economic standpoint because of that durability. So lastly, I usually put in here a slide, the team and the investment. We have, the parent company was the incubator. Again, we've raised about, so it funded all that. We've raised $8.5 million out of a $10 million Series A. So we have a little bit left. Largely what we're doing with that is, it's been friends and family, a few surgeons. The management team's in for almost half of that. So we are still looking for maybe a strategic investor, but otherwise we'll do that ourselves. So we like to say we don't invent surgical instruments, but we perfect them. And it brings you the first innovative cutting differentiation in over 100 years. That original blade I showed you was patented in 1915. Nothing has changed since then. So major clinical and economic benefits for the stakeholders. It's patented. Matter of fact, we got our big broad patent was granted earlier this year, so it's patented to 2043. And then it continues to grow the value proposition for our OEM partners, which is fantastic, right? So, and ultimately brings phenomenal, unparalleled healing benefits. That's it.